Welcome, everyone. My name is Shaul Hanani, and I'm one of the co-founders of USA for Israeli Democracy. Many thanks to all of you, the hundreds of participants in this webinar, for caring about democracy and for joining our discussion today. Thank you also to the millions of Israelis protesting in the streets to keep Israel democratic. USA for Israeli Democracy is a grassroots group focused on US-based actions to support democracy in Israel. We have organized letter writing to Congress, to President Biden, and to Jewish organizations. We have held informational Zooms like this one. We have advocated for participating in rallies and for donating to protests in Israel. And we disseminate information to community activists and to the public in our social media channels, which are linked in the QR code on the screen. Our website and YouTube channel provide accurate, responsible, and the most comprehensive information in English about the judicial overhaul and the protest movement. USA for Israeli Democracy is not affiliated with any other existing group or political organization in the US. We are left, right, secular, religious, Israeli expats, and US-born, all working for one goal: protecting Israel's democracy. We collaborate closely with the protest movement in Israel, and the entire effort is volunteer-based. We very much thank our contributors, translators, and web and social media curators for their dedication and hard work. Today, we're pleased to host Tom Friedman and Dr. Ido Baum to help us understand the situation with the judicial overhaul both within Israel and in the international context. We will start with Dr. Baum and then move to a discussion with Tom Friedman. During the webinar, you're invited to send your questions using the Q&A feature. I invite Oz Ben Amram, a member of our steering group, to introduce Dr. Ido Baum.
Thank you, Shaul. Dr. Ido Baum is the legal commentator of the daily Israeli newspaper, the Marker of Haaretz Group. He is an associate professor of law at the Chaim Strick's Law Faculty at the College of Law Management in Israel and heads the Louis Brandeis Institute for Society, Economy, and Democracy. Dr. Baum writes a weekly column for USA for Israeli Democracy, summarizing the events of the week in Israel. We ask Ido to give us an update on the situation in light of the recent abolishment of the reasonableness doctrine and what is expected to happen in the coming weeks. Ido, bevakasha.
Thank you so much, Oz. It's and Shaul and Tom for being here. It's an honor and a pleasure to give you my honest account, or at least the way I view it, of the current events in Israel, or the current legal situation, and then going forward, I'll try to make some projections about what's going to be happening in the following days and weeks in terms of the legal developments. So let's start with the basics. As you know, roughly 10 days ago, leveraging the government's absolute majority in the Knesset, and without the promised broad consensus that was promised by Netanyahu, and that, as we know from Tom's work, was actually requested as a presidential request by President Biden. The Israeli government gave itself unprecedented power. And this was accomplished by pushing through the amendment to the basic law, that's a constitutional law in Israel, the basic law of the judiciary, that abolishes the so-called extreme unreasonableness standard. So under the current new legal situation in Israel, the government of Israel is now, and its individual ministers are now immunized against judicial scrutiny for being extremely unreasonable, whether it relates to actions of the government or the individual ministers, or inaction of the ministers. And you could basically say that the scales, the checks and balances in Israel were tilted. The courts are significantly weaker now. The executive branch now has vast areas of unchecked and unrestricted power. The unreasonableness clause is one of the building blocks, as you know, of the so-called judicial reform that's orchestrated by Justice Minister Yariv Levine, executed in the Knesset by member of the Knesset Simcha Rotman, and clearly backed by Prime Minister Netanyahu. And there are ongoing attempts to downplay the significance of the unreasonableness clause, and these are patently false. First and foremost, extreme unreasonableness has always been and served as the key mechanism for the court to scrutinize civil service appointments. And abolishing the standard means zero accountability, unscrupulous appointments, and basically opening the door for massive corruption. Secondly, as you probably know and heard, the government is now able to remove relatively easily Gali Baharav Miara from her position as the Attorney General, and if not so, split away the general prosecution from her authorities and appoint very easily and without an intervention of the court, someone as the general prosecutor that will probably be more sympathetic to Netanyahu's position regarding his criminal trial. As you know, the declared objective of Justice Minister Levine is to control judicial appointments. He has said so. And the unreasonableness clause is basically designed to help Levine strangle the judicial system to submission because he has now the power to refrain from convening the Judicial Appointments Committee until either the judicial system submits or he changes the law so that the coalition controls all judicial appointments, which is his goal. But there are actually countless more examples. Let me just give you two tiny examples of irreversible powers that the government now has. You may not know that the government of Israel is the deciding body regarding the natural gas resources of the state of Israel. Israel, as you know, has significant gas resources offshore near the coast of Israel. And the government can decide how much of this gas goes to export and how much will be kept for the future generations of Israel and Israel's energetic independence. At the moment, it's about 60% export and 40% for the future of Israel. But the government can actually decide to export everything and leave nothing for future generations, and the court would not be able to do anything about it. Another example, if you've been to Israel recently, you probably know that buildings in affluent cities in Israel are built to resist earthquakes because Israel is located on the Syrian-African fracture. But this is not the case in the periphery and in the poorer towns. For example, in the town of Beit She'an in Emek Yisrael, in the Valley of Israel, and the mayor of Beit She'an consistently asked the Israeli government to help the people of Beit She'an strengthen their buildings. They're from the 60s and the 70s, and they will not be able to resist an earthquake. And there have been devastating earthquakes north of Israel and Turkey and Syria. The government knows this. It knows about the risk, but it has done nothing. The mayor of Beit She'an said that he will petition the Supreme Court and ask the court to force the government to protect the houses of Beit She'an because this would be extremely unreasonable not to do so. Well, good luck with that. Unlike the United States, and this is something not many people know, in the United States, you have a lot of government agencies that are professional, and they're in charge of making a lot of professional decisions. In Israel, Israel places a lot of power directly in the hands of individual ministers, and the unreasonableness clause now makes this unchecked and unsupervised. This is prevalent, for example, in healthcare. You have the FDA. In Israel, it's the Minister of Health, Media and Telecommunication, Infrastructure, Transportation, Public Education. All of these fields have decisions that are made directly by the ministers. So the unreasonableness clause insulate the ministers from oversight, accountability, and scrutiny. Let's go forward from here. Let's look at the situation in the future. There are 7 petitions that were filed with the Supreme Court asking to strike down the unreasonableness clause, this new amendment. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Esther Chayut, set the hearings for September 12, which is a little over a month from now, and she decided that the petitions will be heard in a full panel. This is a historic, there's never been so, a full panel of all the 15 justices of the Supreme Court. You should know that the Israeli Supreme Court rarely strikes down laws, let alone basic laws. And the fact that it will sit in a full panel probably means that the court sees this as a very important case, which is understandable. Let me give you a short analysis of the arguments that are being argued or will be argued before the court, and what are the chances of the court actually doing something about it. So there are 3 main arguments to strike down the unreasonableness clause. First, that this is an unconstitutional basic law. And this is because it undermines the foundation of Israel as a democratic and Jewish state. Actually, not the Jewish part, it's the democratic leg of the foundations of Israel. Now, you should know that there is no precedent for this. The Supreme Court has never struck down a basic law on the ground of it undermining the foundations of the state of Israel. Some judges on the Supreme Court made comments in the past that this is possible, but this has never been done. Now, clearly, the unreasonableness clause changes the separation of powers, the balance of powers, and so it undermines the democratic nature of Israel. Whether this will be sufficient for striking down the law is not very clear. I'll say something about it in a minute. Second argument is called abuse of constitutional powers. Now, the Knesset in Israel can legislate a regular law and a constitutional law in the same process with the same ease. And this is why this is a very concerning thing, because the Supreme Court has been worried that the term basic law will be used by the coalitions to insulate political arrangements and political maneuvers against the intervention of the court and against a constitutional review. So the court has held, and there is precedent for this, that a basic law needs to be abstract, needs to deal with long-term issues, and cannot be used for ad hoc political maneuvering. In this case, in the case of the unreasonableness clause, there is a precedent that the court has struck down a basic law for abusing the constitutional power of the Knesset. And we know that the unreasonableness clause was fueled not just for long-term goals, but also for short-term considerations, such as the desire to reinstall Aryeh Deri, chairman of the ultra-Orthodox party Shas, as a minister, despite the fact that the Supreme Court disqualified him from being a minister and said that it would be extremely unreasonable to appoint him, having been convicted for 3 cases of corruption. The third argument, the last one against the unreasonableness clause, has to do with the procedure. Even the conservative judges on the Israeli Supreme Court agree that a law needs to pass a certain process before it's legislated, and that this process has to include informed deliberation. The Supreme Court once struck down a regular law, never a basic law, for not having the informed process of deliberation. If we look at the unreasonableness clause, we know that it was really rushed compared to the fact that it's a basic law. Hearings before the committee headed by Simcha Rothman were problematic, to say the least. And over the last week, we found out that there were numerous letters from senior IDF officials to the Knesset, asking to be heard and inform the members of the Knesset about the implications of this legislation on the integrity of the IDF, and that all these requests were refused. And this raises red flags about the informed part of the deliberative process. Now, summing up this point, I think none of these arguments taken separately or standing alone would be enough to strike down the unreasonableness clause. However, given the accumulation of the problems, I think, that's my opinion, that there is a 50-50 chance that the Supreme Court will do something. What can it do? Striking down the law entirely is less likely. I think it's more likely that the court will either strike down parts of the clause, or say that it will interpret the clause in a way that will leave it the authority to scrutinize most decisions except for high policy decision taken by the government as a whole, which is actually the practice of the court today. Another possible avenue for the court to take is to send the law back to the Knesset for redoing the process, which will allow the Knesset to renegotiate a new compromise, because there wasn't one in the current version of the law. The timeline from here. Well, because Chief Justice Hayut is sitting on the bench in this historic panel, and Chief Justice Hayut is retiring in mid-October, which is exactly 1 month after the oral hearings of the case. And according to Israeli law, when a Supreme Court judge, actually every judge, when they retire, they have 3 months to finish writing opinions and rulings. So theoretically, our deadline is somewhere in January 2024, but I don't think we'll have to wait that long. In the past experience and my evaluation of the way Chief Justice Hayut has been acting in similar dramatic cases, what we're likely to see is either a very quick decision within 48 or 72 hours of the hearing, a final ruling, and the opinions will be released weeks later, or a comprehensive ruling sometime around October, probably mid-October, before the beginning of the winter session of the Israeli Knesset. Let me make some projections about what will happen after a ruling. Now, there's a lot of, there's a spectrum of possibilities. So I'll go to the extremes, and whatever happens in the middle would be great. But the extremes are actually pretty worrying. So over the last week, Netanyahu has been giving interviews to US media. He only interviews to US media, and he was asked point blank whether he will abide by the rulings of the Israeli Supreme Court. It's obvious that he was prepared for this question, and he dodged it twice, or at least I saw him dodging it twice. Now, if the court strikes down the law and this ruling is rejected by the current coalition, I think this would mean an unprecedented constitutional crisis of seismic proportions. I hope Netanyahu doesn't want to go that way, but from the statements that he has made, I think he is at least prepared to consider this possibility. I suspect that in such a case, what the coalition will immediately do is push forward a basic law that's already on back burner of the Knesset and is ready to be pushed through, and that is a basic law that will abolish the ability of the Israeli Supreme Court to ever review basic laws again. If the court does not intervene at all, which is the other extreme, then a lot of Israelis who believe in liberal democracy, and I hope are listening to us now, will be very, very disappointed. And I think what we will see is that the coalition will immediately take this as a sign and move forward with the rest of the judicial coup legislation. And I don't want to imagine what will happen in the streets of Israel after that. Now, finally, let me use my last minute and a half, and I want to say something or shed a light on something that's happening underneath this whole judicial coup legislation, because we're focusing on it quite a lot. Well, because we're focused on defending the institutional structure of Israel as a democracy, the coalition is using the fact that we're focused on that, and it's engaged in a massive project of channeling budgets, of appointments, and of legislation promoting ultra-Orthodox and extreme ultra-right-wing interests and institutions and causes. There are more than 200 regular laws that are in various stages of being promoted and pushed through the Knesset that are dealing with issues, sectoral issues that these parties are interested in promoting. Let me give you an example that sort of raises a huge red flag, in my opinion. A few days ago, approximately a week ago, the general director of the Ministry of Education in Israel resigned. This was a guy who was appointed by the current Minister of Education, Yoav Kish, who's a very close minister to Netanyahu. He was appointed by this government. This guy is an esteemed combat pilot. He's a former high-ranking officer in the Air Force. And the reason he gave when he resigned was that this government, and I'm quoting, crossed all my red lines. Now, imagine if you have, like I do, children in the Israeli education system, the public education system, and the person in charge of the education system says, I won't be in charge of the education system under this government. I just don't want to be a part of this. And I'm, taking my hands off the wheel here. I am very concerned. And frankly, I'm also powerless, because if I learn about illegal or unperceivable actions by the Minister of Education, having the unreasonableness clause means that there is nothing that I can do, or many Israelis can do, in terms of a legal response to whatever is happening. And I think this means that underneath the institutional democratic structure of Israel, what we're seeing is a scaled up process of changing the characteristic of Israel in terms of being a country of equal rights, of liberal nature, of secular nature, and actually a country that protects and preserves human and fundamental rights, an issue that Netanyahu promised to promote, but has done nothing about. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ido, for this excellent review. For the second part of the webinar, I'm pleased to introduce Tom Friedman. Tom Friedman is a foreign affairs columnist at the New York Times. He's the winner of 3 Pulitzer Prizes, one in 1983 for his reporting from Lebanon, one in 1988 for his reporting from Israel, and one in 2002 for his columns after the September 11 attacks. He's the author and co-author of 7 New York Times bestsellers. One of them, The World is Flat, A Brief History of the 21st Century, was translated to 37 languages. He received numerous awards for his books, and it is a great pleasure to have Tom with us today. Tom, over the 6 months between February and today, you have written about Israel and the judicial overhaul 12 times. You have written about China and US relations once, and about Putin and Ukraine less than a handful of times. Obviously, the judicial overhaul is of crucial importance for the people in Israel because, as you wrote in one of your columns, it is a battle for the soul of the nation. But why should others care?
Well, Shaul, first of all, thank you very much. And Ido, that was just fantastic. You answered all my questions. That'll really enable me to write more intelligently about this in the future. I've written this, Shaul, and said it many times. I really just write about 3 things lately. the judicial coup in Israel, Putin in Ukraine, and Trump. And it's an appropriate day to be talking about the third one. My view is very simple. If Israel goes autocratic, if Ukraine goes Putin, and America goes Trump, the world I want to leave for my now almost 2-year-old grandson just won't be here. So, and I throw China into that as well. So I think we're at a really pivotal moment. Now, my view all along has been I watch trends in Israel very closely, because my view is that Israel is to wider trends in Western civilization what off-Broadway is to Broadway. You see a lot of stuff that starts there in miniature. It can be everything from airline hijacking and suicide bombing to building a wall. And so a lot of stuff starts there in miniature. I don't know where the start and stop is, whether Israel is now following us or we're following Israel. All I know is that Donald Trump and Bibi Netanyahu are simply brothers from different mothers. They are so much the same person. And our two democracies are facing such similar threats. Blessedly, ours has been slow to respond, but the gears of justice really are turning here now in a relentless way that is makes me both proud and worried, because the stakes are so high. Just as what is the decision pending at the Israeli Supreme Court is not unlike the decision that will be pending before 12 jurors in Donald Trump's trial for basically launching a coup against our democracy. So we're both in very much the same place. And so part of what I'm doing is using Israel as an allegory. I mean, to make people understand kind of what's going on both in Israel and America. But the other, frankly, Shaul, just happened by accident. And the accident was that as the situation, the struggle in Israel unfolded around democracy, I realized that nobody was telling the story of these amazing, I call them democracy defenders in Israel. The Israeli embassy doesn't tell your story. The AIPAC doesn't tell your story. Nobody was actually telling this remarkable story. Now, I have great admiration for President Herzog. He's a personal friend. I'm so old I covered his father. I understand the very difficult situation he's in, because there needs to be some sort of neutral body in space that can try to bring the country together. And so I really respect and understand that. At the same time, it occurred to me that when he spoke to the US Congress, and he gave a beautiful speech in many ways, there was one line that was missing. And the line that was missing was to say to the 535 senators and congressmen and women that gathered there that I want you all to look out the window of this capital of the United States. And I want you to look down that mall, all the way down to the Washington Monument. Now, I want you to imagine that every Saturday night for 30 weeks, 2 to 3 million Americans gathered on that mall and demanded justice and accountability for the January 6th takeover. I want you to imagine that. That's what's been happening in Israel, my friends. So don't give me a standing ovation. I want you each to get up out of your seats and give a standing ovation for those Israeli democracy protectors. When I tell you that democracy is alive and well in Israel, I'm not just speaking in the abstract. That's what I mean. That line was missing, and it's been missing. And you have to understand, I cover foreign affairs and government. I've done this for a long time. I'm 70 years old. I've been doing this since 1978. So I'll let you do the math. So one thing I've understood about being close to the execution of American power is that when you're in the White House, man, it's just a fire hose. I mean, it's Ukraine one minute, and it's some crazy thing Republicans are doing in Mississippi the next, and it's something going on in the EU, and it's Israel, And so it's very hard for the president to necessarily focus on anything in a sustained way. And when you have a situation like in Israel where, again, there's no Israeli embassy kind of telling the story, pounding on the administration's door. There's no AIPAC telling the story of an unprecedented democracy movement and defense. It's just hard to get on the radar screen, frankly. And our wonderful ambassador to Israel, Tom Friedman, had just retired. And all this came together at the same time. And so I took it upon myself, just instinctively. That's why I can't explain to you what I'm doing, because a lot of it was just instinct, to lobby the White House, to stand up and make statements that would be both restraints, hopefully, on the government, and at the same time encouragement to a democracy movement that is simply unprecedented in my experience. And I was in Hong Kong for Occupy Central. I was in the Maidan in Ukraine shortly after the president there was ousted. I was in Taksim Square, and I was in Tahrir Square. So I've seen a lot of these manifestations, and there is nothing like this. And so that's what I've been doing. And one day I'll sit back and maybe try to figure out why I was doing it, but that's the best explanation I can give you. It's because I care personally, and because I think it's hugely important.
In your columns, you write that values shared between the US and Israel are very important. For example, in your February 12 column titled "In 46 Words, Biden Sends a Clear Message to Israel," you write, "America has supported Israel militarily and diplomatically and with billions of dollars in aid since its foundation, but not because it always shares our interests. We have given Israel so much support since its founding because we believe Israel shares our values," and those words are highlighted. US administrations have supported autocratic regimes around the world. A relevant example we'll talk about more momentarily is Saudi Arabia. Can you talk more about the importance of these shared values? What might happen to US-Israel relations should Israel's judiciary lose its independence and Israel becomes a Hungarian-style autocracy?
Well, let me address the last line, Shaul, because I don't think that's the threat for Israel, that it become a Hungarian-style autocracy. So I've actually lived for just under 5 years in two countries right next door to each other in the Middle East. I lived in Beirut from 1979 to 1984 with 9 months off in between. And then I lived in Israel from 1984 to 1988, actually where both my daughters were born in Hadassah Hospital. So I've lived in these two countries right next door to each other. They have many, many differences, but they are identical in one very fundamental way. They are two very, very, very small countries that are very, very, very diverse. They are extremely diverse. Now, America is an extremely diverse country too, but it's a very, very big, extremely diverse country. But Lebanon and Israel are quite unique. They are extremely diverse ethnically, politically, religiously, and they're extremely small. Now, when you are an extremely small country that is very, very diverse, there's only one governing system that works. It's called live and let live. Or in the case of the Lebanese peace agreement that ended the civil war at Taif in 1985, which I covered, it was called no victor, no vanquished. No victor, no vanquished. That's the only way you can govern a small country that is this diverse. And that was the system that Israel, in a way, I don't want to say fell into, but it kind of adopted. There was a certain balance between the political system, the judiciary, the media, the business. It all added up to a kind of live and let live context. And we lived in Old Katamon when we were there, when I was the New York Times correspondent. And in the 4+ years that we lived there, it got actually more and more orthodox. So much so that I was one of the few people who drove on Saturday on our street. But my attitude was, I'm really going to go out of my way not to drive on Saturday if I can. Not because I have a sister who's Lubavitch, but that's another problem, another question. But it was just out of respect. It was just out of, I don't really share their religious values, but, they're living there and I'm living here. And it's not that big a deal for me to, really go out of my way to just respect their point of view. So that is how these places work. My friends and my closest friends in Beirut, many of them were actually intermarried, Shiites and Sunnis. We refer to them as sushi, that's how these places worked all these years. In Lebanon, you had a political balance identified. The president was a Christian, the prime minister was a Sunni Muslim, and the speaker of the House was a Shia. What happened in Israel, by the way, what happened in Lebanon, is the abandonment of the principle of live and let live for the principle adopted and often attributed to African dictators. It's our time to eat. Oh, we got in now. It's our time to eat. That's what's new about this government. They won by 30,000 votes. They know that, but they had an extreme agenda. And when they got in, they simply said, it's our time to eat. And when you take an incredibly small, incredibly diverse society, and you replace live and let live with it's our time to eat, you threaten the whole system. And this is a point that my friend Ari Shavit made to me just the other day. The threat to Israel is not that it become Hungary or Poland. It's that it become Lebanon, that it simply disintegrates. Israel is not going to become Hungary or Poland. The demonstrators have made that clear. Okay, we are not Hungarians and Poles. I mean, no insult to them, but these are people for whom democracy is in their bones, and they're just not going to be ordered around. The danger to Israel is that it disintegrates. And by the way, the same danger applies to the United States, and that's what I've been warning from the very beginning. So all of these are one story for me, but that is the real trend, and I think that is the very real danger, because what I learned in Lebanon, what I saw is that you had politicians, selfish, who thought it was their time to eat, and oh, did they eat? And they hacked away at the system and hacked away with it with a hammer, always saying, when I get in, I'll behave responsibly. But for now, I'm just going to hack away. And then one day, I can't tell you exactly when it was, that hammer blow landed on the system, and it all fell apart. And when it falls apart, you can't get it back. And what's the name of the party most responsible for doing that in Lebanon? Hezbollah, the party of God. And what is the group in Israel, if I gave them a name between Ben Gvir and Smotrich and the ultra-Orthodox? The party of God. And so there's a lot of similarities here. And what I'm worried about, as I'm deadly worried about in America, is that you never know when that hammer blow unravels a set of norms, normative behaviors, expectations of elite responsibility, and the whole thing goes. I'm working on a new book now on how to write a column. And it's really, the first half is how to write a column. And the second half is actually about my 4.5 decades of doing it. So I talk about the biggest thing I saw, the best thing I saw, the worst thing I saw, and the most hopeful thing I saw in my 40 plus years. I won't go into the biggest thing I saw. It's about a Promethean moment we're going through. The best thing I saw, I explain, is I think the best thing that happened in my 4 decades as a journalist was the creation of the European Union. Now, Americans will do anything for the European Union except read about it, okay? But when you step back and think about it, a continent that has been synonymous with tribal wars from time immemorial transformed itself into the biggest collection, multi-sectarian, multi-religious, multi-ethnic, multinational, of free markets, free people based on the rule of law and human rights. In my lifetime, a continent that for the last 100 years required my American brothers and sisters to sacrifice 1 million of their lives to go over to that continent, World War I, World War II, and the Cold War, and quell its tribal wars. That continent has become the second United States. We are the first generation of Americans to live in a world of 2 United States and not just one. That, if you can think of something more important, better that happened in my life, I can't. I really can't. That was a big deal. It's not appreciated by Americans with all the EU's problems. So that's the best thing that happened in my life. What is the worst thing that happened? So I've written a whole book on nature and natural systems, and I use natural systems as a proxy often for learning about the world and explaining the world. And on my first environmental trip, my wife was on the board of Conservation International, a great environmental NGO for 16 years. And actually they took me on my first real environmental trip. It was to the Atlantic rainforest in Brazil. And they taught me about mangroves. Mangroves. I didn't know anything about mangroves. We didn't have those in Minnesota. So mangroves do 4 very important functions. They provide 4 very important services in nature. First, these are forests that grow in coastal areas in the water. And you've seen them before. So mangroves, first of all, they filter toxins and pollutants. Second, they provide the protection from storm surges. So when the tsunami hit Indonesia, in Aceh, the towns that had taken out their mangroves were washed away. Those that preserved them were protected. They actually provide nurseries for young fish to grow because mangroves have very cabled roots and it's hard for big fish to get in there. So they're protected from their predators. And lastly, mangroves hold the land in place. They anchor the land. And the worst thing that happened in my life is that we lost our mangroves, but not just in nature. You see, in America, when you think about it, in America, it used to be that if you were a president or running for president and you had unprotected sex with a stripper 4 months after your son was born, you were kind of out of politics. We lost that mangrove. By the way, to use a Minneapolis example, if you called for defunding the police and actually put it on the agenda without a plan for actually doing it, that was a mangrove. That mangrove was called elite responsibility. Elite responsibility. In Watergate, Howard Baker, the Republican leader at the time, said, no, the Constitution comes before the president. What you're witnessing in America today, literally, are people arguing the president's aspirations and will come before the Constitution. One of those people arguing that is the Speaker of our House, Kevin McCarthy, a knucklehead of towering proportions. The same is true right now going on in Israel. Yair Levine, all these people taking a country for whom live and let live can be the only sustainable governing philosophy and replacing it with it's our time to eat. So we're losing our mangroves. I won't go into the other ways we've been losing our mangroves. And that is the worst thing that happened in my life. And so I'm using my column in America. I'm so incredibly lucky. I work for the most amazing newspaper. I've been at the New York Times since 1981. Okay, so that's 42 years. During those 42 years, I don't say this immodestly, I've probably been the principal person writing at the Times about the most neuralgic issue for the New York Times, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Hard to think of anything that consistently got more letters to the editor from our readers. When my first publisher, I actually was hired by Punch Sulzberger. I was promoted to columnist by Arthur Sulzberger Jr., and I now work for his grandson, A.G. Sulzberger. To this day, I have no idea what the Sulzberger grandfather, father, or grandson think of my reporting about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Not one time in 42 years have they come to me and said, Tom, could you dial it down a little on Netanyahu? Could you, be a little tougher or easier on Arafat. Never, I have no idea what this family thinks about what I've been writing about this issue. Do you know how unusual that is in journalism? What a privilege that is. Now, I'm doubly blessed that since this issue in Israel emerged, and as you said, I've written a dozen columns. I've actually never done this before. My own editor, the editorial page editor, Katie Kingsbury, and her deputy, Patrick Healy, they are, in my view, two unsung heroes because they've let me do all of it. Not only have they let me do all of this, but they have actually enabled me to do all of this. I mean, the other day, that column I wrote about Israel and Saudi Arabia, I mean, I sort of decided on it, you know, the afternoon before. I stayed up all night to write it. Patrick Healy, my editor, got up at 7 a.m. to edit it. Gita, our fact checker, got up at 7 a.m. to fact check it. And Jose, my copy editor, got up at 8 to edit it. And we had it out to the world, you know, shortly thereafter. That doesn't happen anyway. That's not how the system works. But they have understood how important this was to me and to our readers. And so I am blessed to be able to work with such people. So shame on me if I didn't take advantage of this, because I go back to where I began. No one's telling your story. Not only that, as Shaul alluded to when we started, Netanyahu, we know, does not give interviews with Israeli media, except Channel 14 or whatever it is, the Fox channel, and occasionally, you know, once every, you know, third Tisha B'Av to the Jerusalem Post. Okay, so he only gives interviews with the American media. Now, I'm trying to explain to my American media friends, if Bibi Netanyahu is giving you an interview, that is not a compliment. It's because he thinks he can fool you, okay? And just watch the interview he did with George Stephanopoulos, where he said, I'm watching this, and Netanyahu says, Biden invited me to the White House. I sat in the Oval Office across from the President of the United States, who told me he did not invite him to the White House. He said, we'll get together in September. A statement that was reinforced by the White House spokesman, Admiral Kirby. But he just goes on, he just says this stuff. And unless you know the details, Bibi Netanyahu is a world-class heavyweight propagandist. Do not get in the ring with him unless you have been in training for 3 months to take him on. And so I was thinking about it, you know, if Netanyahu were a Palestinian activist on George Stephanopoulos, and he said that this Palestinian activist said, President Biden has invited Abu Mazen to the White House because he really admires his position. And that weren't true. Do you know where the first call would come from? The Israeli embassy. Oh man, they'd be all over ABC News. That's a lie. That is not true. You got to correct that. In fact, they'd start a watch, you know, every day. When are you going to correct that? You know, but you got nobody here, folks. You got nobody here telling your story, fighting your media campaign, and basically explaining what is going on. And so you've done remarkable on your own. God bless you all. But the deck is stacked against you. And I'm doing what I can. But one of the things, part of this has to be to you need a media war room. That when Netanyahu goes out and lies, you are on him immediately. And not only that, following up. Hey, ABC, this guy lied. Okay, if it was Trump, would you just let it hang out there? If it were a Palestinian activist, would you let it hang out there? Why are you just sitting there nodding like a bobblehead, you know? So the only good news I can tell you is that actually Netanyahu's doing this, and no one believes it. People can tell, you know. I would say, in my estimation, and in my understanding of the president's estimation, this is not a quote, but it is my perception, he knows that the vast majority of American Jews and Americans are with him on this issue. So Bibi can go out and, you know, prevaricate all that he wants, but it's not really getting through. And the base of the Democratic Party in particular, there's kind of a competition of who they like least MBS or Bibi Netanyahu. My money's on Bibi, and this is just not getting through. So that was a long answer to a short question, Shaul, but that's what's on my mind.
Well, thank you. There's a question that is of great interest to many people in Israel, and of course to us here in the US as well. As Ido explained to us, on September 12, the Supreme Court will convene to hear 7 petitions on the validity of the law abolishing the reasonableness doctrine. In several recent interviews with foreign media, Prime Minister Netanyahu refused to commit to complying with the Supreme Court's decision. It could take several weeks until the court publishes a decision. During that waiting period in late September, Bibi is expected to visit the United Nations and hopes to meet with President Biden. A meeting with Bibi and President Biden during this period, in which we expect even more incitement against the Supreme Court, would be a huge blow to the protest movement. If Netanyahu then doesn't comply with the court's decision, the meeting would also damage Israel's democracy and Biden's credibility. So this is a multi-pronged question. What is your assessment of the likelihood that President Biden will meet with Netanyahu before it is clear he is honoring the court's decision? And of course, the word clear is to distinguish from promises, because as you just said, we know Netanyahu has lost credibility for things he says. Number 2, President Biden told Netanyahu he would be invited to the White House before the end of the year. If Bibi doesn't comply with the Supreme Court's decision, how likely is it that President Biden will indeed meet with him? And you have alluded to some extent to the third part. Given that President Biden is facing an election year, how critical is it for him to invite Bibi to the White House before the end of the year?
So there's a lot of questions there. First of all, Biden has never promised to invite Bibi to the White House at any time. All he promised was that they would meet sometime in September when their paths cross, possibly at the United Nations. So that's number 1. Number 2, I can't answer your question, Joe. It's a very good question. Because when Netanyahu did that, and he agreed to meet with Bibi at the request of President Herzog, the whole situation wasn't where we are now, where the law has since passed against the wishes of the president, and now it's in the lap of the Supreme Court. Therefore, the meeting between Biden and Netanyahu would have a different resonance completely. And so I'm glad you attentioned me to that. I hadn't really been thinking about it, but you can bet that I will be pointing that out in my column, and in any other way that I can. The one reason I actually hope Netanyahu comes to New York, and maybe even meets with Biden there, is I think you will see a protest of significant proportion of Israeli Americans. And I would like to see that show. I think there would be a significant protest. I've said for many years, much to Netanyahu's annoyance, that if he came to the University of Minnesota today, I used the University of Wisconsin, Joe. If Bibi Netanyahu was invited by the Israel Student Union at the University of Wisconsin, they would have to bring out the National Guard. There would not be enough police in Madison to handle that. Now imagine this situation in New York. So New York will provide no relief for him and his wife. If they think they're coming here to stay at the plaza to get away from Israel, I guarantee you there would be huge protests. And I also believe if President Biden met him, President Biden would not sit there like a stage dummy, like some of the people who have been interviewing him. He would use that opportunity in public to make very clear where he stands. So I'm not too worried about that. A lot of people ask me, because I've had a chance to see the president on numerous occasions, what's his state of mind like? His state of mind is crystal clear, and he knows a bullshitter when he meets one. Okay.
We have time for one question Myla Kaplan, one of the members of our steering group, will field one question from the audience. Myla,
I
go
have
ahead.
time for, I have actually a phone call with Lebanon about their situation in 20 minutes. So I can do 15 more minutes. I need to be done at 8:10 my time, 9:10 my time.
Sounds
If
great.
you-
Yeah, we have more things to discuss for sure. So Myla, go ahead.
Okay, so, hi, everyone. I have a question for you, Tom. Is the Biden, and this is from the audience, is the Biden administration aware of the fact that the extremist minister of national security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, fired the Tel Aviv police chief since he wasn't violent enough, and that Israel's police force has become increasingly brutal toward protesters to portray the nonviolent protest as anarchism?
So let me just abstract away. This is a very legitimate question, but it actually is relevant to how I think you understand the power dynamics between Israel and the United States. I doubt President Biden is aware of that at all. He's president of the United States. His biggest concern geostrategically this morning is what's happening in the Donbass, not what's happening in the Israeli police department. And so I think it's very important to understand that. But that is a segue to why I wrote about the Saudi potential deal between the United States, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the Palestinians. Because there's only so much, and this is what Israelis have got to understand in the democracy protection movement, there's only so much a president of the United States can do when it comes to shared values and defending shared values, and using his moral suasion to encourage an Israeli government to not neuter its judiciary. And end the separation of powers. There's only so much a president can do when it comes to intervening in such an internal affair. The reason I introduced the Saudi initiative was to basically say, and I began the column this way, dear democracy defenders in Israel, I know you're really depressed that this was forced through, but help may be on the way, because the Saudi, Israel, Palestinian normalization American dynamic has the potential to shift the American involvement in the Israeli internal matter from shared values to shared interests. Now, when you get in the way of American shared interests, zeh mashu acher, okay, then you're in a totally different dynamic. You can mess with our shared values. There's not much we can do if a country wants to abandon its shared values with us in the immediate term. But you get in the way of our shared interests, then you're dealing with a whole different dynamic. And that's what I was trying to explain. So what was what was I laying out? I was doing several things in that column. I was explaining that this thing is such a long shot. I don't have I need binoculars to see how long a shot it is. Okay, but it's a long shot. But if the United States were to agree to Saudi Arabia's demands of a security treaty, civil nuclear program, and advanced weapons in return for normalizing relations with Israel, and if Saudi Arabia made as its condition for that normalization the preservation of a two-state solution with a freeze on settlements or a rollback, whatever conditions those are, I was signaling in that column that I will know whether the Saudi demands are real if it blows up Netanyahu's coalition. That if it actually puts before the Netanyahu coalition, you can have annexation of the West Bank and 2.9 million Palestinians forever, or normalization with 1.5 billion Muslims around the world. Which do you want? I personally will only support a deal that puts that serious and stringent conditions on the table. If we did not do that, let's take the extreme case. If President Biden did this deal and MBS said, I don't care about the Palestinians, and rewarded Netanyahu with a normalization with Saudi Arabia without any demands on the Palestinians, the United States would be literally killing two principles with one bullet. We'd be killing Israeli democracy by rewarding Netanyahu with this geopolitical benefit of massive proportions, and we'd be killing a two-state solution. I personally do not believe the Joe Biden I know would ever do such a thing. But I am making it my business to make sure that everyone understands that's what's at stake here. The downside is it could be too much, and the Israeli cabinet would find a way to accept it and stay in power, in which case it's not serious. The upside is we change this dynamic between Israel and the United States from one of shared values to one of shared interest, in which case you will taste real American power, and it blows up this coalition. And so I'm very focused on this. And just to make sure that I was being understood, I quoted Chris Van Hollen, my senator, member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and a member of the Senate Operations Committee that funds American diplomacy, as saying there is zero chance that the base of the Democratic Party would support an agreement that does not advance in a very credible and measurable way the restoration of a possibility of a two-state solution. And that's one senator. And I haven't gotten to the rest of the base of the party, which is even to the left of him. And it's why I keep warning that Joe Biden is probably the last pro-Israel Democratic president. If you actually listen to what's going on in the base of the look at the head of the Progressive Caucus called Israel a racist state. She took it back. She misspoke, under enormous pressure. She represents half the Democrats in Congress. Okay, so if you think she misspoke, I have a bridge in Hebron I'd like to sell you, in terms of what she is actually feeling. So I'm just one columnist. I'm just doing my thing, but I'm very much watching this dynamic between the Saudi deal, normalization with Israel, and what effect it would have on Netanyahu's cabinet when you introduce the question of American interests now, and not just American values. But I have to underline, getting this deal is the equivalent of putting together a Rubik's Cube. It will be very, very difficult. And there will be a lot of opposition on many, many grounds. So, but I wanted to put it out there just to give the democracy defenders in Israel something to maybe hope for and look out for. I will say that we've gotten farther along on this Saudi normalization deal than I understood, which is why I wrote about it. And who knows? We still don't know enough about the deal. I don't know enough about the deal in terms of American interest, whether I'd support it, frankly. So we just got to see. That's all TBD.
Thank you so much. That was a much more thorough answer than I was expecting. Also, Shel, do we have time for a question for Ido as well?
We have a few more minutes with Tom before he leaves, and then we'll switch to Ido.
Okay.
So I just wanted to follow up on that, Tom, on the Saudi Arabia deal. I know you said there are many uncertainties. It seems to me that the largest uncertainty is Bibi Netanyahu himself. Even if the coalition blows up, he would have to make a coalition with two other currently opposition members who have said they will not make a coalition with Netanyahu. And so it's hard to see how that all comes. And he would probably seek reprieve from the indictment and the trial that he's facing right now. Do you have any comments about that particular weak link?
Yeah, it's one of the many reasons I just don't know. This could go in so many different ways. I mean, to me, maybe Netanyahu would do this on the condition that he leave power. There could be all kinds of conditionality around it. Look, nothing has distorted, in my view, the politics of America more than Donald Trump, and the politics of Israel more than Bibi Netanyahu. What they both do is they create a context where it's impossible for the center left and center right to come together and rule. At a time when I believe, and this is part of what my book is about, unless you have a complex adaptive coalition running your country, which is to say it's governed from the middle out, not from the edge in, it's very difficult. It'll be increasingly difficult to govern effectively. And so I think that I think we're just way ahead of ourselves, Shaul, and I'm just going to be watching this. I may try to go to Saudi Arabia, in the next month or so, and really try to get a closer independent assessment of what's going on. But it will take months to play out, both the diplomatic negotiation and then whatever Senate ratification would be required. And there will be significant opposition, both from the Democratic left and from the Tucker Carlson isolationist right. As I've written, only a Democratic president can get this deal through. Because if a Republican is president, he would probably get that many Democratic votes. So it's only Joe Biden can deliver this kind of deal. And it would be a game changer. So that's why I'm putting it out there, but I just hope, this has been great. I learned so much from Ido that it was worth it for me just to hear that. I now know how to think about this going forward. But the most important thing I think to understand is you're home alone. America can only do so much for you. And Joe Biden did a lot in the current context. He understands American Jews are with him. I'm not worried about him, going overboard. But if I had one piece of advice for you, is you need to send a team over here of people like Tamir Prado, the former head of the Shin Bet, a group of generals, and they need to visit people who no news organization could turn away. Okay. And they need to go to the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal and to Fox News and to the Congress and everywhere and say, look, and to their colleagues here, by the way, to the head of the CIA, to the head of the State Department, to the head of the US military, and say, hey, us, we're not, some flower children, okay? Netanyahu is not telling you the truth, okay? And that's why we're here. When Tamir Prado says we are now ruled by the equivalent of the Ku Klux Klan, that gets people's attention. No one is telling your story. And it's one of the most remarkable stories of democracy defense in the world. And no one is telling your story because the system here is set up against it. The embassy's not going to tell your story. The knuckleheads who run AIPAC are not going to tell your story. Only you can tell your story. I'm doing my best in my own little way, but I got to write about other things too eventually. So it's on you at the end of the day. It's on you to win this court case. It's on you to tell your story. And I just really hope that you can and will, because it is a remarkable story.
Tom, this was great. Do we have time for one more audience question, or are you rushing out?
Super fast. I got to go to Beirut in 7 minutes.
Myla, one more audience question.
Okay. Can you address the acceleration of West Bank de facto annexation by far-right Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich?
Well, I really, you guys are closer to that than me. I just have to give a shout out to Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, who, first of all, opposed this thing and is now clearly doing everything he can. I mean, Gallant's a serious guy. This guy was head of Navy SEALs. I don't know this. I barely know him, but I imagine he must wake up every morning and think, I was head of Navy SEALs. Just to be an Israeli Navy SEAL is no small thing. To be head of the Navy SEALs is something else. And I've got to deal with a guy who was too crazy to even be allowed into the Israeli army, and another guy who did some 6-week summer camp, and so I'm reaching out here, and it's one of the things I try to explain to American Jews. You don't know these people. You did not go to Camp Ramah with these people. They were not in the Catskills with your family, okay? These are Jewish supremacists of a messianic strain. And anyway, so I really just want to express my admiration for what Gallant is doing. I'm glad he didn't quit, because judging what happened the first time around, all that would have happened is some of the other people in the party would have tried to get his job rather than taking his example. So, but it's really, that's a little too internal for me about what's going on. but it's the multiple fronts, and Ido alluded to this at the very end, I think, or Shaul did, I'm sorry. These are serious, one of the things I always used to say about Hezbollah is that compared to the Palestinian PLO in Beirut, these are serious guys. They know how to get stuff done. They know where all the levers of power are. And so if you aren't as serious as them, and one of my mottos about the Middle East was that extremists go all the way and moderates tend to just go away. So I behave as an extremist moderate. That's what I do. Because I know all their tricks. I've been doing all this for a long time, but you've got to be as extreme as they are, because you can't just go away. You got to dig in, you got to stand, you got to fight, you got to stay on top of them at every minute. But it's going to be a challenge because we've never seen this before. A group of Israeli rightists who think it's their time to eat. And you're going to have to really dig in. These are serious people. And I try to be as serious as I can in my little lane, but I just have a column in the New York Times. So I gotta depend on you all to do it from your lane. And now I have to go to Beirut.
Well, Tom, thank you very much. If you have 30 seconds, I'd like to end the webinar to read from one of your own recent columns. It is finally time that the American government, the American Congress, American Jewish leaders and lobbyists, who too often have been Netanyahu's enablers, make it unmistakably clear that they're also marching with all of those Israelis, from the military, the high-tech community, the universities, traditional religious communities, doctors, nurses, Air Force pilots, bankers, labor unions, and even settlements, who took to the streets in the last week to ensure the 75th anniversary of Israeli democracy will not be its last. Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you very much, Ido, for this excellent
Wait, Ido has a couple of more minutes for a couple more questions. Now Tom has to go. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, questions for Ido?
Myla has a couple.
Okay.
Let's stay to it then. Conclude.
Hi, Ido. So, can you address the significance of the subordination of women in the coalition that in the legislation that they've already enacted and that they are proposing in relation to the further erasure or distinctions between religion and state in Israel, and how this tracks with changes of the status of women within other nations that have lost their liberal democracies and become autocracies?
Well, I can't make the comparison to other countries because I think it comes from a different angle. What I can see, and this is what I alluded to in the final words of my initial presentation, is that there are a lot of moving parts, a lot of laws, and a lot of budgets that are moving towards the direction of less equal protection, but we're facing a backslide in terms of the general process to increase gender equality in Israel. I think we see this happening in various places. What's typical for what this government is doing is that the moves are very discrete and specific. So it's really hard to see the larger picture at the beginning, but there is a larger picture happening there, and it's probably planned because, as Tom very eloquently said, these are extremist groups, and they have plans, and they're willing to promote this. So, for example, there are laws that are taking back and broadening the authority of the rabbinical courts in Israel. Now, the rabbinical courts is a separate court system that has only men as judges, and the laws that this government is passing are extending the jurisdiction of the court. For example, it would be easier to force divorced couple to adjudicate on issues of alimony in the rabbinical courts. Although there were changes there, but they generally tend to favor the husband over the wife, and additional changes that will increase the ability of rabbinical courts to adjudicate matters of civil matters instead of civil courts. So this is an example of the situation that drives Israel away from gender equality. You can see it, of course, in the government itself. There are no women in general directors position. This is basically a government where the voice of women is disappearing, and that's extremely worrisome, considering the fact that the matter of equality is not protected in Israeli constitution. I mentioned this, that Netanyahu said that alongside the judicial coup, he's going to promote legislation that will enshrine fundamental rights like equality, like freedom of speech, and so on. But he has done nothing, not even proposed a bill to promote these issues. But he is pushing forward with the judicial coup.
Thank you. That's
And we have time for one final question.
okay. Are Lapid and Gantz right to refuse to join Netanyahu in the government? And would a more moderate government not be in the interests of Israelis?
Again, there are so many moving parts. It's really hard to say. Obviously, if Lapid and Gantz theoretically would join Netanyahu's government, then Netanyahu would be able to push out the extremists and form more moderate government. But I think that will be first of all, Lapid and Gantz. I'm not sure that they have the mandate from their voters to do such a thing. And I think that will be the end of Netanyahu in the long-term relationship of Netanyahu with ultra-Orthodox and ultra-right-wing parties. That will be a sort of death sentence for the Netanyahu long-term sustained existence as the head of the Likud party. I don't think this is in the interest of Netanyahu at the moment. So Lapid and Gantz may be discussing this. This is entirely a theoretical idea at the moment. Netanyahu is in power. He has a coalition. It's politically stable, and none of his members have any other place to go. If we go to elections now, clearly Likud loses a lot of mandates. The ultra-Orthodox may stay as strong as they are, but the coalitions that face them are not very favorable to them as this coalition. The ultra-right-wing, I don't know if they have a possibility to join a potential coalition that's not headed by Netanyahu. So everyone in this current coalition knows that they should find their sort of right-wing to extreme right-wing balance, and this is, in the sense of finding a moderate solution, this is the only explanation to why eventually we will not see all of the judicial coup passing, but some sort of intermediate solution between the Likud and its friends to the right in the coalition. But I don't see any possibility in the near future that Netanyahu will be joining Lapid and Gantz and throwing away his current coalition members.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ido, for a
you.
great presentation. Thank you everyone who participated in the webinar, and thank you, Ido, for your other contributions to USA for Israeli Democracy. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you in the next webinar. Bye-bye.